celebrating cinema. This is a special Imagine Film Festival edition of Nightmares and Nostalgia. We are joined by the wonderful Imagine Film programmers Lauren Murphy and Stan Ligozinski. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
But before we start, we have some rather exciting news to share. This episode is sponsored by Mubi streaming platform, an eclectic collection of hand-picked cinema. In partnership with Lab 111, you can enjoy the first 30 days free, where you can watch some of the films that we even celebrate on this podcast. For instance, our free picks for this month include Portrait of a Lady on Fire by Celine Sciamma, which of course we discussed with Basha Bohr on our episode of Female Desire and Balancing the Gauge. You can also watch our very own muse Tilda Swinton in her feature debut, Caravaggio. And as a special for this episode, you can watch the classic The Housemaid by Kim Ki-young, a Halloween classic, where you can also find a whole feast of Halloween treats that we will no doubt be referencing in this special edition. You can find all this at movie.com/lab111. And a gentle reminder just to share all this great news with more people. Please leave a review wherever you listen to this podcast and make sure to subscribe so more people can find us. It helps us more than you would expect. Now, Tom, why are we here?
Oh, geez. We are here because it's October, our festival month.
Spooky season.
Spooky season as well.
Spooky,
Halloween, spooky. But this year, I'm very happy to announce that in October, we have Imagine Film Festival over. The best, and maybe if not the only, real genre movie film festival in Holland, which has moved from the Film Museum to our cinema and to the Film Hall as well. So yeah, I thought it would be a good time to invite Lauren and Stan to talk about genre films and our memories maybe of genre films that titillated us when we were younger and how they still push our buttons maybe.
We're very happy to have you, and it's perfect that it coincides with the spooky season when everybody wants to watch horror films again. And, you know, there's a list of great films in the canon that everybody agrees that are perfect to watch right now. But I thought that maybe with this episode, it would be nice to also discuss some films that are very dear to us, but maybe less apparent to other people that haven't seen them, not necessarily because they're better or more highbrow or more unique, but simply because they left a permanent mark, an agreeable kind of scarring almost. I think that everybody has that experience of watching a horror film from a young age and being just so impressed, not necessarily with the film itself, but maybe with the genre or the format as a whole, because suddenly all of those tropes and things and themes that work in horror, you get them for the first time and you really get engulfed by them. I'm wondering, first of all, kind of like at what age were you really starting to get into scary movies? Do you remember how old you were approximately when you started going down that spooky lane?
I think quite young. To hear you describe it, I think it's sort of trauma therapy for most genre programmers, because I think if you scare easily, you're also attracted to it. Mm-hmm. If you wouldn't be, what's the fun?
Exactly.
I'm still scared by a lot of things. But one of the first memories of being really scared was Theo and Thea and het Tenenkaas Imperium, which is probably not saying anything to Stan. And to be honest, I haven't dared to watch it back. I must have been 4 or 5 years old or something.
You need to explain for our international listeners
what the hell
So
that
there used to be these two characters on Dutch television. They had really long front teeth, which in itself is weird. I mean, Dutch children's television was weird. The VPRO was so weird.
We can talk a whole episode about Ik Mik Loreland as well. So.
And Bruno de Purno, it was odd. And so there were a couple with these big teeth, and they had all these adventures. And I think it was kind of absurdist theater almost. They both came from theater, the actors. And they had one movie where they chased someone who collected like the dirt between your toes and your toenails, which is one of the grossest. It's kind of body horror of a la lettre. And I remember there's one scene, I believe, but I might have completely misinterpreted it or don't remember correctly, but somebody either hangs himself or pretends to, but there's this image from below of this body hanging from the ceiling. And I think those were the images when you were younger where you didn't expect them, and there's this one image that would stick. Mm-hmm. It's the same with Nicholas Roeg's The Witches.
Exactly.
And then later you find out, oh, it's Nicholas Roeg. Oh, there's these fisheye lenses. Well, actually, this makes a lot of sense, you know? But I think when you're younger, it's mostly those very visual cues that stick, or at least the ones that I remember most.
Yeah, just to tag on to that, like Dutch children's TV, I presume that you know, many children's TV has these kind of like very out there things, but another show that I watched in elementary school was called Ik Mik Loreland, and that scarred an entire generation because it's kind of like a fantasy show that is very much language oriented, how you learn like complicated Dutch words, but there's a character in it, a very evil character called Carbonkel, that kind of like suddenly shows up and
I like
has
the boogeyman.
multiple iterations, and all of them are equally terrifying. And I genuinely, like, people would start crying when the TV got wheeled in so that we could watch Ik Mik Loreland on school TV. And it was so traumatic for kids that they had to leave the classroom as soon as the TV
I
was
love that
wheeled
too, the
into
sort
the
of
classroom.
actual physical
Yeah, the
distance
physical
you need to have
distancing.
from this screen.
I mean, yeah, totally. How about you, Stan? Because you didn't grow up in the Netherlands, but you're also a genre programmer, so you probably had an early experience with the scary stuff as well.
Yeah, and for me, it's also children-tailored content, obviously. And it also has a national flavor, because there is a series of movies. Poland, the first one is called Mr. Blot's Academy. And they are actually adaptation of a book that was published in 1946, and it channels a lot of atrocities of war. But of course, that's not something you understand at the time. But it's about this fantastic academy run by Mr. Blot, which is everything that you would expect from a school. So it's all about fun and experiments and everything. And there's this kid that kind of disappears into this fantasy land of this academy where all this fantastic thing happened. But at some point, there is a wolf's army, and there is this army of men wolves with like men with wolves' masks that is marching to storm the academy. And there's this heavy metal band that was huge in the 80s in Poland that recorded a song which is called March of the Wolves. I think this scarred the whole generation of people in Poland. Like, actually, the cycle for a genre festival in Poland when everybody was listing the most terrifying scenes that shaped them and scarred them forever. And I think it was listed by pretty much everyone there. So I urge you to listen to the March of the Wolves by the TSA, Polish heavy metal band. And Mr. Blot Academy is the most trippy thing you can find. So take some magic mushrooms and...
Kids don't need that. That's the...
It's their natural state, yeah. So how did you go through childhood?
And now, because we're talking about this, I had to suddenly think of Goosebumps. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
That also like really fucked me up.
But
Even
the
though
books too, right? They were books.
Yeah, there were books too, and there are many like many of these sort of book-related things as well. Like Matilda, for instance, like all the Roald Dahl sort of adaptations are also. What was with that guy? Honestly, such a visceral, out there feeling.
I think it's that Roald Dahl took children really seriously. He didn't
Yeah.
really want to write for kids, so he was like, kids' fears are legit. Kids are legit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna write
Yeah.
really scary stuff that's actually really scary for adults
But it's
too.
anti-pedantic as well,
Yeah.
because like maybe it's also kind of okay to scare children with media or with art or culture, because I mean that's what folklore and whatever is also for, right? That you invoke a kind of fear or angst.
Bit of a cautionary situation.
Yeah, a cautionary thing for good reason, because
Yeah.
it is about, you know, the witches as well. It's about not really trusting every adult because they don't
Yeah,
always are what they...
it's not a message they like to send in schools. Yeah.
It's a sound message. No, for sure. I think like seeing those things from an early age onwards, but also seeing how people around me reacted. People were much more afraid of many of these things than me. So it also felt like it gave me a strange sense of power that I was actually able to enjoy these things, the visceral thrill of being scared and trying to seek that out as well. So in my elementary school class, and I think we discussed this on the earlier episode, we really tried to seek out a lot of horror films at the time. And I remember being around the age of 12 when me and a couple of friends were almost in a kind of competition. Like, can we think of the scariest thing to see, right? Around that time, for us, the scariest thing that we could possibly imagine was The Exorcist, of course.
Yeah.
Because it's about a kid being possessed by the devil or a demon.
In the face of the enemy,
Let the enemy have no power over me.
and the son of iniquity be powerless to harm
Your
her.
mother sucks cocks and hell
Lord,
carrots,
hear my
you
prayer.
faithless
And
swine.
it sounded sick, and there were all of these kind of like stories about it, and apparently it was very filthy and grotesque. And I actually managed to convince my father to watch the film with me, but on the only kind of like condition that we had to see it during the day with the blinds open and the volume very low, and him sitting next to me, and then he was like, okay, well, here we go, The Exorcist, and we started watching it, and I was like, okay, I can't wait to tell this at school that I've seen The Exorcist, and I definitely bragged about it afterwards, that I was like, yeah, I've seen The Exorcist, and it's crazy, and it's insane, and so scary. But at the same time, I was generally so fucking terrified the whole time through. I remember there was a very fragrant set of flowers in the house. Very, very fragrant. And that scent for me is still connected with the fear that I felt.
How Proustian of you.
Yeah, I'm getting down this Proustian reverie here. But that scent is still connected with the experience of watching Exorcist with my father, because it was just such a frightening
But
experience.
it's funny that you said it, because I have the exact same thing, that because when, and I think I also mentioned this on an earlier episode, when my parents got divorced, my father, to sort of give me something to do, would take me to the VHS rental store, and I could get anything I wanted, like everything from Child's Play 2, and I had to, suddenly this movie popped into my head, The Dentist. And there were like so many sequels to The Dentist.
Hi there. Is this your first trip to the dentist?
Dr. Alan Finestone's a renowned dentist who's got it all. But behind the success is a man who's feeling the pressure.
Open wide.
And you know, it's
The
like
dentist too.
The
The
dentist too.
dentinin.
Yeah, the dentinin. This summer, you will lose more teeth than just one. I never actually ended up seeing The Dentist, because it's
saw
just
it?
no. I've never seen any dentist films,
We
because
should have programmed it next year just for you.
yeah, just especially for me. I think they're a bit crappy, right?
I don't know. I haven't seen it
there we
either, but
go,
I'm not
yeah.
as obsessed with it as you are. That's the odd
Yeah,
thing.
I am obsessed
Point
with
of
The
this
Dentist.
episode that we can start talking about films like The Dentist, okay?
Maybe I don't want to see it. Maybe it has to be this sort of
it's-
thing, like in this scary thing that I will never see. But it's like what you mentioned, this
Yeah, but it's
this
like with
channel
The Exorcist
television,
as well. Like everybody had somehow picked up on the fact that the film existed and had associated all of these things with it. So the film also in our minds became even more terrifying, maybe in a sense than it actually was. Because
Yeah.
sometimes not seeing the film and thinking of it is more scary than actually seeing it, because you actually think of what is the scariest thing I can imagine. But the funny thing about seeing horror films is that what you can imagine, Imagine Film Festival, gets
yo.
expanded, and you get a bigger lexicon of what you can possibly imagine as being the scariest thing on earth.
This is exactly what I wanted to work up towards, was that. So I got really desensitized when on a really young age by seeing like, well, I think I've mentioned this before as well, like Seven really young.
Put the gun
I
down.
saw you with the box. What was in the box?
Because I envy your normal life.
Put the gun down, David.
It seems that envy is my sin.
Oh, what's in the box?
Not till you give me the
What's
gun.
in the fucking box?
Give me the gun.
And I was talking with a friend of mine today about, I can just picture the Polaroid that you see of the knife that somebody attaches to his body to have sex with a woman in Seven, and you don't see the killing at all. You just see that Polaroid. So seeing that at a really young age, that really fucks you up. And then when I was in high school, I'll never forget the moment where Scream had suddenly come out. And that was going to be like the scariest thing ever. And we had like this house party, and I was really in love with the girl that everybody was in love with in my class. And she sat next to me, and while we were watching Scream, she suddenly grabbed my hand. And I wasn't shocked at that. I was shocked that I wasn't shocked at the shock that was coming from the screen. I was like, are you scared of that? You should see that knife from Seven.
Yeah, you do remember all these things next to a film, I think, when you have a memory or sort of nostalgic. The film becomes bigger than the thing itself. I had a big fear of the Joker for like years, unhealthy amount of years after seeing Batman when I was too young. The Burton the original,
one.
yeah.
You know, without you, I just wouldn't want to go on.
Because Burton's early ones were really dark too. We're actually screening the
very
Addams
grotesque,
Family at Imagine this year, and we had all these conversations about like which kids. Because for the first time now we're screening a kids' film for kids and parents. So we had to look for something that's fun for our generation, sort of nostalgic parents wanting to take their kids to go see something. And we're like, yeah, this needs to be The original Wednesday was really weird, really weird. I don't know about the new one, but the Joker was so big to me that at some point I didn't trust my parents that the face they were wearing was theirs.
Oh my
Like
god.
it went far, yeah.
I mean, that's even more scary than my Exorcist nightmares, where I
And
woke
it's
up
scarier than
thinking
the
that I
whole
was being
film.
choked by the devil.
Yeah.
Jesus.
And so much scarier than Jack Nicholson ever was in the
Yeah.
film. Like I actually have this book of drawings when I think it was like third or groep 6, where they asked us to draw what we found scary, and I drew the Joker, and it had like knives through his head and really pointy teeth.
What?
None of that's in the film, but it became this mythical. And then I watched it again when I was 16. Kim Basinger's in it. There's a host of princes in it. You know, all of that. Forgotten all about everything else.
Yeah, I was quite sheltered as a kid, so my parents didn't really allow me to watch films with a lot of violence. But actually, this thing slipped through the cracks because then I saw Batman Returns at 6. And then when you see that first film...
With the penguin.
Yeah, and like when he's dropped in this basket into the canal, and then that's very relatable for a small kid, you know, to be treated like this by a parent. So that's one of this kind of scary moments of my childhood.
So how did that slip through the cracks?
Yeah, because it felt safe. It was an adaptation of a comic book, and I think nobody actually felt it's going to be this dark and this gothic as it actually was. So whenever I saw anything scary when I was a kid, it was basically those moments that I stole somehow, and the time that I made. And I had a 4-year older sister, so she would sometimes, bring something home or talk me into watching something. And I remember like the first actually outright horror thing that I've seen. I don't remember which year. It must have been around 93 or 94, and that was the first season of the X-Files. And I don't know if you remember that third episode, which was about this guy called Tooms who was eating livers. And he lived under this escalator.
Oh, yeah. I remember. Wow.
In this
Ooh,
pile
this
of
is-
trash.
Yeah.
And,
That's already scary. I mean, escalators scare me, to be honest.
yeah. So I was always afraid of losing a liver to Tooms since then.
I was always afraid, but that's not a horror movie, but just this kind of like story that I was afraid that my shoelaces would get stuck in the escalator and that I would just be kind of like sucked into the whole thing, and then I would probably have to live a life like this Tooms character, just being permanently stuck underneath the escalator. That was one of my childhood fears. So
Let's light a candle for young Hugo Emmershau.
Well, how then, Stan, if you were relatively sheltered from that, but you sense this kind of like, you could call it maybe a morbid curiosity into this maybe more macabre stuff in media as well. When was it for the first time that you were actually able, with your own agency, to see the things and seek them out that you wanted to see? And what kind of stuff were you looking for then?
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of relate to what Tom said before, that, at some point when I was a teen already, I could choose my own films. And then very early, I watched some stuff like Salo or,
Yay!
And so if you watch something like that as one of your first scary experiences, then you are desensitized a little bit towards the actual horror.
Yeah.
So then when I actually get to watch all the classics, when I was like a bit of an older teen, then you are able to get that critical distance because you actually see something that is existentially fucking scary.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that these were the most terrifying moments. And I remember very vividly, I was 16 and I watched 29 Palms of Bruno Dumont, which he himself calls a horror film.
Yeah.
And this is the film that, maybe someone watching from the side would not call it a horror because, you don't have an outright monster or anything like it. But those situations are monstrous. You're always dropped in this like heightened situation of escalation of emotions and violence. And this is something that, left a big impression.
Would that be like a talking point at the programmers table now? Say that would come out now. We have these discussions all the time during Imagine, like what would fit, what horror.
Yeah, what even constitutes a horror at
or
this
a genre
point?
film, because we're talking about horror now, but obviously Imagine is also
more
science
than
fiction
that.
and fantasy and everything in
I
between.
always have that with one of my favorite films of all time is Komenzi or Idi Smotri by Elim Klimov, which more or less constitutes as a horror film about war. It's a war film, but that's the most visceral
horrific,
experience of like, it feels like you're actually in that war. When that movie ends, you have PTSD, or you've watched your PTSD for the past 2.5 hours or something. So indeed, what does constitute a horror film?
I think the main rule we kind of stick to is it needs to be heightened in some way, whether that's in the way it's written or the way it's shot or the way the story's told.
But that's becoming way
More normal now, which
no,
is
but
harder.
that's also But on the other hand, it's got like the sort of the crossovers have become so strange
gentrified,
that
you know.
I mean,
also.
I do think like for instance a movie like Raw, for instance,
Mm-mm.
didn't do as well at the cinema because it was so hard to market because most distributors thought like we're gonna market this as a horror film, but it's more a film about sisterhood with cannibalism. So it's changing all the time and it's becoming way harder to actually pinpoint what something like that is, right?
If I may say something
you may not.
controversial,
Of course.
Then you may, then you
there
shall.
You go.
contrarian corner, it's open
the
again.
contrarian corner is open.
I'm becoming quite allergic to the idea that there's, and I think many agree actually, that horror needs to be elevated. And elevated horror is a very annoying term to me because I think it only speaks to exactly this talking point at the programmer's table of like what constitutes a horror. But the fact that horror itself might not be enough or is not artistic enough or not interesting enough and is not also a drama or all of these other things really irks me. Because what I think it ignores, and that's what I really like about Bruno Dumont example, Stan, is that drama itself can also be horrific and that human interaction and human beings can be monstrous and that it can be very scary and frightening actually to watch films about people that are so disturbed or unsettled or go through all of these unsettling things. And I feel like there's now a new league of films, mostly, you know, from the kind of A24 ballpark, that are trying to claim that in-between space and make it a new genre. And it's a genre with diminishing returns, in my opinion. And maybe there will be more films being made in that register that are really good. But I'm mostly now really annoyed by that it's both of those things not quite. And it leaves me wanting more of both of the things. The kind of like human personal immediacy and then the kind of like sheer visceral thrills.
Yeah, no, I agree and completely disagree with you as usual,
Thank you.
as per usual.
Yeah. That's the theme of this podcast.
The whole thing, because I mean, it would be weird if I would agree with you, because I think like Midsommar will remain one of my favorite films of the past 10 years, and it does that exact same thing. But I do think there's like this sort of almost linguistic issue going on where we just need something to be something for it to be that thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's really going wrong.
I mean, that is that's definitely talking about linguistic issues.
exactly.
That's definitely a linguistic issue. I'm raising this issue, but how do you perceive that from a, you know, you need to make a festival. You see all of these films. You see also what's happening, what's changing in the landscape around you and how people approach a genre in film and also try to maybe raise it to a more quote unquote artistic level. How do you perceive those things and how do you kind of like discuss them?
It's a non-discussion partly.
Yeah.
Well, at least we haven't even really discussed it much within the team because elevated horror is bullshit in the sense that it's always been or can be. So why would it like the best horror films are about life, are about society, are about human fears, are about interaction? That's nothing new.
No,
like the dentist.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yes,
I mean,
human
there's many
everyday
people that are-
interactions.
yeah.
I think that the films that we debate most about are not the A24s, or because most of them are just plain horror or plain sci-fi. You can try to label them differently, but they're actually quite clear cut for us, at least. I think they're more the ones that really veer more into the art house drama, and then maybe with some folk horror in between. And you're kind of every year we have this discussion of maybe we should have a separate category for films that we know our core audience is maybe going to yawn at, in the sense, but we love. And we feel they add something to genre and they play around with touches of magic realism or certain types of history.
But I have to say that because it is a point of a discussion.
Not the elevated horror discussion necessarily.
Yeah, but what I mean, it becomes more of a point of discussion every year because what happened is that there is this fashion right now for introducing fantastic elements in the films.
Yeah.
And we've seen a lot of that, especially this year, for example, in Cannes.
Yeah.
That there are movies that are outright drama and actually the fantastic element doesn't play any role. It's just there as a kind of sprinkling on top. because it's just fashionable
It's
at the
just
moment.
kind of like a baiting of a kind of
Yeah,
genre.
but that's not the A24 elevated
Oh, no,
horror
no,
stuff.
I don't say it is.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I see that tendency.
Definitely.
And I guess for us, like we have more affinity with those films that Tom mentioned before that might seem to be dramas, but then we watch them and we are like, wow, actually it's like outright horror for us.
Yeah, so
It's
you
really
read
addressing.
the synopsis and you're like, this is not for us. And then you see them and you're like, actually, this is for us.
Yeah. But you know, things like Holy Spider, for
Yeah.
example, this year. I mean, it's a political film by Ali Abbasi, who actually, we got to know as a genre director before with The Border.
Yeah, with guns.
You might watch it and you see, okay, it's mostly political. It is a serial killer story. But if you look at the existential horror that it packs, that's a no-brainer. Like, it just works. And for me, that's in.
And I remember that Imagine was also the festival in the Netherlands, at least, that really embraced The Golden Handshoe by Fatih Akin, which is a film that I completely turned around on. That at
Because
first
I
I
remember
really
us
hated.
talking about it
Yeah.
in Berlin. You
And-
hated it.
And I regret hating it. And I will say it every chance that I have that I totally came around on that film. And I actually think it's now very, very good. But it's
Great,
very...
you should do this more often. Come around on things that you actually
well,
think.
there's some things, Tom, that will never change. He knows what I'm talking about.
You're talking about Clint Eastwood, I think.
Amongst others. No, but it's interesting that those are the kind of films that then a festival like yours can rally behind because they are somewhere in that in-between state. And then somebody also needs to maybe, platform them in a way that makes sense for that movie as well and show the people what the movie can actually be and is
Yeah.
actually.
And reel in also an audience that isn't maybe our core audience and then gets
Yeah.
to know other types of genre film through these kind of films. Like this year we have the Cinq Diables, for instance, the Five Devils. Lea
With
Misius.
Adele.
Adele. Oh, no, don't
Go.
do this to me.
Somebody. Exarchopoulos.
Oh, wow.
Sargopoulos,
I think you nailed it.
Wow. We got so close in Cannes this year, right? So then we talk about that at the table, which is not... I enjoy those discussions most and those films most, where it's not
Yeah.
entirely clear. Or, for instance, Monos, the opening film
Oh, yeah.
3 years ago, which I think was that our last physical edition?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was
gonna
a
be a party
daring
this
choice
year.
because we
Yeah.
sometimes we opened, we had Get Out in the years before, we had Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs, you have these big productions, and then we had a small Colombian, Dutch, German, Uruguayan co-production about these young guerrilla soldiers in the jungle. And the sense of existential dread is huge because of the sound design and the
Yeah.
way they're just in the midst, kind of like a war film that you just described, not on the same level, but some people really didn't understand why we programmed it as the opening film because it wasn't a clear-cut.
No, but it's the same
Imagine
thing with
title.
like Michel Franco's New Order, right? Like that
Year
is in a
after.
sense. Then what is horror really? I mean, how shall we describe that film? Like the people have taken over.
Today, a
Yeah.
film about today.
A film about today, yeah.
Yeah, it plays to actual fears, at least.
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah, and if I can sort of wrap this incredibly intellectual conversation up in a nice positive bow, I am happy though that genre is sort of seeping in more other stuff. You say you are a bit
No, I'm
pessimistic about
no,
it. Maybe.
I mean, I agree with all the films that are being mentioned, which is also why I agree with the festival, Imagine, and the programming. But I do see what Stan also acknowledged, that there's this kind of like baiting of a genre audience with stuff that doesn't necessarily work per se in the film itself, that also dilutes and muddles the mixture a little bit and just has diminishing results. Those films also exist.
True.
And that's why I raised the issue.
But I always
yeah.
thought that the genre audience was maybe a bit in the minority compared to, like, let's say, the audience that goes to Anthony Hopkins in The Father.
Yeah, you need
So-
to cappuccino
But
boomers.
horror
yeah.
is one of the few things that have always
No,
that's
that
always
is true. You know, that's true.
got the
Yeah, that's
numbers
true.
in.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
at the
Yeah.
same time,
Yeah.
Because now we're getting into the like a contemporary landscape and also this in-between state of genre and quote unquote respectable cinema. But can we maybe backtrack a little bit and go back to the heydays of kind of like not very good but still interesting movies that made an impression on
The
you?
Dentist.
Can we go back to like the Dentist core? I want to go to that level because I think all of us have probably also seen those films that are, as I said at the beginning, haven't maybe really left a mark on the film landscape in general, but somehow are films that are dear to you.
While Stan and Lauren are thinking about this, I just want to name The Dentist 4. This is not the real title, but it just popped into my mind. Dentist 4, Root Canal.
In the
Nice.
show notes.
Thank you. Well, one of my probably fondest memories of a horror film that I have is this film called Stir of Echoes with
Oh my God,
Kevin Bacon.
Yes.
Tom, can you turn around and look at me while I'm
What?
talking to you?
Exactly. Don't you understand? I'm supposed to dig.
Why are you digging?
I'm searching.
What are you searching for?
The question is not what. I think we both know very well what, even if we don't want to admit it. Question, Maggie, which you can plainly see I am very busy trying to answer. The question is where?
Such a great movie, though.
Yeah, it is a really good movie, and I'm not saying that it's a bad movie. It's actually a great movie, but it's the kind of film that doesn't get like. This is why I want to talk about it, is because I love that film.
And Kevin Bacon is so scary.
He's
and
very
also
scary.
very sexy. I think from a young age I intertwined those two things because of him. Which is odd. But yeah.
And the film is definitely kind of like riffing on a lot of these kind of like floating elements that were very popular in horror around the time, you know, like lost girls, buried bodies, ghost apparitions, mirrors, hypnosis, all these kind of like subconscious states. And yet all of the things it did quite well because it just played it like so outright and in a sense also sincere. But I have also, again, a very physical connection with the film because there's this, and maybe, Jesus, getting like this weird deja vu, but maybe I've already told it on the podcast. Sorry for our recurrent listeners. But there's this scene in the film. They're living in this house, and it becomes clear maybe that maybe there's something wrong with the house. It's haunted by this young girl who was murdered. And Kevin Bacon and his son both are seeing separately, they don't know it from each other, this apparition of the girl. And the family has this new age friend, and she's into hypnosis and all of that stuff. And then she starts to hypnotize Kevin Bacon to get rid of kind of like the spooky thoughts and whatnot. And she places him in through the hypnosis in a movie theater like that's empty, and there's words on the screen, but the words are blurry. He can't read them yet, so you know, you move closer and closer. You see the words on the screen, and so the words slowly start to become more crisp and clear. And
It says the
it
dentist.
It says the dentist 4, root canal. That's the title card of the dentist 4.
I was so in this story. I'm so sorry.
So it's a clue in the film or whatever. But later there's a moment where she's doing the hypnosis again. And this is one of the best scenes that I can remember from my childhood, is this moment where he's in the hypnosis. She's doing it again because there's still some subconscious secret that needs to be resolved. But she places him in the movie theater again. And this girl, the ghost, the apparition, she's sitting on like 4th or 5th row. And he's like, no, don't make me go there. And she's like, you're moving forward, closer and closer to the screen. It's like, no, I don't want to go. And the girl is like getting closer and closer. And it's just kind of like The Ring in reverse, where the girl in The Ring comes to you, but here he has to go to the girl. But he also says that he doesn't want to, but he's forced to due to the power of hypnosis. And at the time, I was working in a cinema as the boy. I was a teenager that was like replacing the posters. And I had to walk through the empty screening rooms, and the lights are always off because it's empty, and the lights are, you know, they are expensive to put on. So it's just this dark theaters, and I'm walking around with my movie posters, and every time I have to walk through one, I'm just basically running through them because I just don't want to see the girl as well. And that's a film that I saw 7 years prior, but had to think about all the time, and I haven't seen it since, and it just has gotten, of course, better and better in my mind.
Next year, just for you.
I'm wondering how accurate that recollection of that scene is as well.
I mean, I think it's quite accurate. I would have to watch it again and maybe do an addendum next episode.
I have this scene in my mind as well. Like, last film that I generally recollect being super scared was Yuon 2, The Grudge, the Japanese one.
Wow.
But not the first one, the second one.
The second one, yeah.
I haven't seen the second one. Tell me.
So yeah, it's a sequel, so maybe it's not the one that is in the spotlight, but for me that is the most scary part. I mean, the whole film has a circular structure, so there is a little bit of you're a bit lost in like what's actually happening, which adds to the horror, at least like at the time when I saw it. And there's this one scene where I think the woman or the guy, I don't know who lives in that apartment, but keeps hearing this knocking sound, and there's a stain on the wall. And you just don't know what that is. It's just kind of like a scary presence in this apartment. And it's just like, up, up. And at some point, I think the guy visits that apartment, and he's there to kind of protect the other person who's scared. And then he goes off to like kitchen or something, and like the sound starts, and then he's going back, and suddenly there's this girl, and of course like the drowned Japanese ladies in the J horror, but she's there and like looking at him, and then she's just doing this movement with her hand, and you don't know what the fuck is going on. And then you realize that there's actually another boy that is hanging from a ceiling, and then like she's basically tapping him like like a pendulum.
Those are the scariest things.
And it's just tap,
Yeah.
tap, and then I had to pause.
Yeah, and then you realize that all the time it's been that. It reminds me, I don't know the title anymore, of this Spanish horror film a few years back, and all night there's this sound, someone's waking someone up, the same sort of knocking on a wall, and then the next day it turns out that it's like his mother who's hanging in the bathroom and just being
Oh my God.
all night. He's just slept through it,
Jesus.
those kind of things. I think the last thing I found really scary, and not necessarily the film, but just the idea, was a Korean film called Door Lock. I think they've remade. This girl, every morning she wakes up and something's different about the house, but she can't really place what it is. Little things have been moved, but she's not quite sure because they're so small. And then at some point you find out that there's just this guy that's breaking in every night, sort of plays house with her, drugs her while she's sleeping, and then just sort of lies next to her. He doesn't really do anything. I mean, he does, obviously, but it doesn't go that far. But he brushes his teeth with her toothbrush, that kind of stuff. And then her toothbrush...
It's wet.
It's moved the next day, like that kind of stuff. No.
That's almost, this is really weird, but almost like the story that the guy tells in Drive My Car, but then in a horror way.
And also that's sort of the urban legend of someone putting their hand under the bed and then the dog is licking it. But it's actually a guy. Yeah.
I would prefer the dentist I guess.
Let's just turn this podcast into creepy hour. Just get a little
like
campfire going.
Now.
So do you also have like personal phobias that just made particular films scary for you?
Oh, that's interesting, because I don't have like... It's more the other way around, that films have made me aware that I can be very afraid of things, but I don't have a lot of phobias. My girlfriend, for instance, she has a huge fear of needles. So whenever we see a film with a needle, she turns to me and I have to tell her when she can look again to the screen, because it just makes her so queasy. But I don't have anything like that as well. I can also watch probably all 4 of The Dentists without trouble, because I also am not afraid of the dentist.
No, me neither. Me neither. Although, maybe, if I would actually watch The Dentist...
You would have the phobia. How about you? Because I'm the boringest person to ask this, because I don't really have them.
I guess I asked because I have a slight claustrophobia, and I remember the time when I was like genuinely scared at Kill Bill. When,
in the coffin.
When she's being buried, and then I really had problems breathing looking at that.
Have you ever watched the Ryan Reynolds starring film?
I was just going to say Buried.
Yeah, I mean, then you actually, you build up some resistance, which is actually great about horror. What you said, Hugo, in the beginning, that, like you get used to certain things. And then last year or the year before, we had this movie called Meander at Imagine as well, which is about a woman basically waking up in this like weird trap.
Cut your head. Also, the one about the drill bit in the ground.
Well, I mean, like I learned over the years to actually kind of power through those films, but I'm still kind of suffocating a bit watching that, because it's really, I mean, my reaction to that is really visceral.
I haven't seen it yet, but I heard that this movie, Fall, this kind of like...
I was just going to say, we really wanted to program that for Imagine, but it came out too early.
Yeah, exactly.
In August.
But I really want to see it, because I don't have afraid of heights either, but I do like the idea that a film could maybe give me the impression of what it feels like to have that fear, which is also nice to kind of like feel, oh, this must be what it feels like to be maybe a bit claustrophobic or whatever. It's kind of like, it can instill somebody else's fears in you as well, of course.
You're
Which is
so
really-
jaded in life. You need to have it
You
vicariously.
could be on top of a 3,000 meter high tower in a movie.
No, I'm just reason life's too boring, you know. I just want to, I just want to
That
have a
was
good.
Movies
thrill,
are like
yeah.
drugs for you.
Yeah,
Fall is
right.
the film I really wanted to dislike. I saw it in Cannes, and then you're just at the edge of your seat for 2 hours. It's by the same guy who did, I think, 27 or 47 meters down, which I haven't seen, which is the opposite.
How
but
many
under-
meters are it, Lauren? Come on.
Yeah,
47 meters down, right, with the sharks.
that's a lot of meters.
That's under the sea, and now he's moved it. Now he's moved it up to 3,000 meters high
Yeah,
in this tower.
That's even
Just
more
two girls
meters,
getting
yeah.
stuck on two climbers getting stuck on an electrical platform. Yeah, that's it for an hour and a half. But it's really well done.
I'm thinking about like reasons to be scared in cinema right now, and also like watching a lot. So like the volume of stuff that we watch is actually so huge that there is very rarely a moment where something works.
yeah.
But they work for different reasons.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering like, what was the last time you experienced such an excess or something like that you were actually disgusted or like I think. Between all of us, we've seen everything on screen already. Any atrocity you can imagine.
There were like the Faces of Death panel.
Yeah, but something you saw and I was like, oh, that I haven't seen yet.
To be honest, the full experience of Mandy didn't terrify me, but it did give me a sense of, whoa, like I haven't seen this either in a long time or ever.
And definitely in that kind of like widescreen format, because for me, also growing up very much, as a young teenager with everybody getting really just having their own computers, getting smartphones as well. People were just showing each other the grotesquest and filthiest things imaginable on the internet, That was kind of a sport for us on our high school as well. That definitely desensitized a bit of what I see in film, because film always, in a sense, has to convert it into a story, which is maybe then more conventional or has a catharsis or an escape or a release. Whereas if you see it isolated in a GIF image or whatever in a small video, it becomes its own thing as well. So it's like what you're saying with Mandy is just that it becomes interesting when it gets so blown up and then has that emotional intensity as well, maybe that it becomes scary. But generally, the things that really scare me now are the things that I still have trouble wrapping my head around, but then definitely have this sense of unease and unnervingness. I mean, David Lynch films are very good examples of that as well, especially Inland Empire.
And every single thing you say, it's not casual conversation. It's you look at him, and it's almost like very adult, very proper. Very solid.
Which I think is probably his most interesting film for me at this moment, because I think at every different stage in your life, there's another David Lynch movie that works best for you. But what's his name? The Philippe Girard. What's the name? This kind of Girardier, who also makes these kind of like nightmarish, disturbed kind of films. The first time I saw one of his movies, I was also very unsettled. Another film that also made me feel that a lot was Der Siebende Continent by Michel Haneke, which is probably the scariest film that Haneke has also made, even though he has made Cachet and some other really scary stuff. But those are the kind of films exactly because they instill this kind of like existential fear almost that really still work for me from a kind of like horror point of view.
Thank you for mentioning Lynch, by the way, because I now realize that the single most scary thing I've ever seen in cinema is the person behind the diner.
Yeah.
And it links to something that you wanted to bring up, what still sort of bugs you now the most is things that I don't see. So things that are explained, but then you don't see them. So you have to do it completely on your own. It's not the movie actually showing you all the horrific violence or emotional damage or something like that. But then with Lynch, for some reason it works because it's an incredibly long scene of two guys in a diner and one is telling the other that there's a really creepy person behind the diner, which makes no fucking sense than to go outside, walk very slowly towards the wall where the person will be behind, and then I think it will be like 5 frames, have that person like slide in, like, and then slide out again with that buzzing Badalamenti score underneath it. It's just, and then you see
Classic
him go
reaction
like,
image.
But we started with children's stories, and actually horrors are a little bit like vaccine, right? So like, you are scared, and then you see the monster, and then you're kind of vaccinated, and like you can put that fear aside.
Yeah.
But if something is suggested and it's out there, but you don't exactly know what it is, and then the fear never leaves
Because
you.
that's the thing with The Exorcist. When I was so scared of that film, I genuinely believe if I hadn't seen The Exorcist at the age of 12, I wouldn't become a film critic, because I had to stay up all night trying to rationalize that I have seen a movie, and I had to deconstruct it. Like, yeah, but there's cameramen shooting it, and they're probably still alive, and just all of these. I had to think of people are making this movie and they're not dead.
They're probably still alive.
I mean, you have to. This is the film that made me aware of the apparatus around it.
Yeah.
For me, the French New Extremity, where the excess actually was, and the viscerality of this, like Trouble Every Day.
Yeah,
and,
wow, that's a fantastic film.
Things like I'm thinking about it, and if I think about the current edition of Imagine, for example, there's a lot of films that are kind of explicitly horror, and like you're going to see a lot of killings and violence as always, because of course this is a treat and this is a ritual. We love those films.
Fun.
The one thing that stayed with me, and it's disturbing for me still, is, for example, Earwig, which is a new film of Lucille Hadjihalilovic.
Oh yeah, she's amazing as well.
And her movies work like that for me, basically. That, on the surface level, like they are slow. Like this movie is extremely gothic as well. So like, people going, it's a mansion, and it's a lot of things actually play out in sound.
How is the girl?
Everything is well, sir. She sleeps soundly. Her appetite is good.
And the teeth.
All is as it should be.
But the fact that you can't piece all the puzzles together, and it is about PTSD as well, coming back to Tom's remark from earlier, but there's nothing maybe so outright scary about the situation, but there's something that you cannot quite crack, and the loops and the elements that it stays with you, and it just stays as a disturbing image that you just try to solve. You can never quite get there. I remember like discussions when I first saw it with my friends, and like every discussion just ended with like multiple interpretations, and everybody was like, yeah, I mean, it's just going to stay with us.
I work for Cineville too, and we asked the question to our Instagram audience, which film haunted them most still? And Lynch came up a lot. George Sluicer's Spoorloos, which I don't know if you've seen.
Yeah,
especially because people go, I'm never going to petrol stations again. This screwed me up for life. The Shining itself kept coming up as well, exactly because not everything is explained, whereas in the book it is. So that's the sort of perennial discussion of Kubrick saying, he actually put like in the sidelines apparently in the book when he was reading it, don't explain.
The moment in The Shining where Shelley Duvall runs up the stairs and she turns around to the right and she
that
sees
scene,
in the
it's
doorway
kind of, that
a
is very
guy
Lynchian
coming
scene.
up in a bear mask, and then apparently that guy had been sucking off a butler. And then the camera just crash zooms into first Shelley Duvall and then into the other image, and you go like, I have no idea why I fucking hate seeing this.
My brain can't
handle this right now.
Well, to wrap it up, and also speaking about things that leave you wanting more, what are some films at Imagine that you're particularly proud of, or that our audience maybe should seek out as well during the festival?
It's one of the biggest editions we've done.
Yeah, there's 70 full features, so there's a lot of stuff to watch. I mean, the range is just from outright horror through like things that are disturbing and surreal, to things that are funny as well, or like funny and disturbing. Like it's all over the place.
The range is from disturbing to nice and disturbing.
That's what fantastic genres are all about. For me, like in an unorthodox manner, like Earwig would be my scary proposition, which is not outright scary. There are a lot of films in the program that might be, let's say, scarier on a first glance. But this one is just, wow. I mean, like, if you watch it here, Tom's, with like proper sound system, this is the film to watch in cinema. because the build-up and like this atmosphere of this gothic mansion, and there is a girl at the center of that film who doesn't have teeth. Coming back to the dentist.
See what you did there?
I knew it.
And the person who takes care of her like makes every night like teeth out of saliva for her, which melt in her mouth. And you don't understand what is going on in there. And it's just, this one is going to stay with you. This one from the disturbing side. When we talk a little bit about the kind of a fun and disturbing, I really recommend Attachment.
That's really fun.
What I love is actually when the horror films like tap into local traditions, and this one is really touching up on the Dibuk story, which actually the Demon show that Imagine like 5 or 6 years ago by Polish director Marcin Wrona did as well. So it's really Jewish mysticism and this demon that possesses people, like the deceased person
But in
that
this
possesses
immigrant
people.
context in London as well, which makes it really
Yeah,
layered.
exactly. That's like, I mean, it's between Denmark and UK, and like this cultural context is really beautifully painted, and it is a love story as well. It's about attachment and the issue of that attachment, and it's really a small movie for 4 actors, which is so beautifully played. And there is like this fear on one hand, and then kind of a Jewish humor on the other, which is also kind of beautifully mixed in that film. So that's definitely a recommendation for people who enjoy classics. There is Andrzej Żuławski's On a Silver Globe.
Oh my God, I love that film.
And Gandahar.
Kandahar, yeah.
Yeah,
but far out.
we have a special treat with On the Silver Globe because it's not only the 4K restoration of that film, which is this masterpiece that never got completed. It's like if you liked Jodorowsky's Dune, this is again like this kind of story.
Also a film that is so confounding and overwhelming, and you don't totally get a
Dune.
sense of this On the Silver Globe. You don't totally get a grip on the world itself, but you accept that it exists. And then things happen and you don't know why. And that's also scary.
It's this wounded masterpiece that never got finished. You can only imagine how it got finished. And it's coupled this year, I'd imagine, with a documentary, which is called Escape to the Silver Globe, which actually explains the whole phenomenon behind this film and what was the actual situation, why it never got finished, and what were the circumstances, and why it is such a unique piece of work. So I think this duo works really well together, and it's something unique. Again, a very cinematic experience.
I'm looking forward to Island of Lost Souls.
It was a live performance with it, right?
Exactly, with a drone synthesizer
Nice.
musician, Tos, who is also in Sun O, the band. And there's going to be lots of smoke. Sorry about love. No, I think he wanted a lot of smoke. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Turn off the fire alarm.
But that film is rarely being shown, and it's one of the first sound films, but without a score. So this will be the first time that it has a score. So I think that's good. And it's like the original Dr. Moreau story, because we have a theme this year, Lab Rats, because we're in Lab Elf. We managed to get you there because you were kind of hesitant. Like, everybody wants to do Lab Rats themes here, but we trust you to do the right thing.
I always said, like, I don't want people to do something that's actually around what the building was supposed to be. So around the laboratory, and do it like very sort of, this is a horror crypt where people were cut up.
Yeah.
And then when you came up with this suggestion, I was like, yeah, okay, yeah.
If a festival's going to do it.
You can do it.
Well, which is nice, because 2 of my favorites are also in the Lab Rats program, and it shows like that theme can go in so many directions. And one of them is Vesper, which is a post-apocalyptic science fiction film by a couple who's just, they're so good at world building. I love these films that imagine that you know that in a few years, when they've made, this is I think their 2nd or 3rd film, but the visual style is so much there. And it's about a small girl who, in this post-apocalyptic world, has built this little laboratory where she creates plants out of nothing, essentially. She sort of biohacks whatever is in her environment, and it's just so beautiful, so well done. So she's sort of the mad scientist by herself in this swamp area.
And speaking about world building, and if you think that nothing impacts you anymore in cinema, there is actually the whole VR section as well, where you can be in the center of the event.
We forget.
We forget.
So if you think you're not titillated anymore by films, then
you just have to change the apparatus.
Yeah, exactly. And also this year for the first time we're doing interactive VR, so it's not only
really
360, where like you have jump scares from behind you.
Yeah.
But this is really generally a situation where you have an impact over what's happening around you. So there's going to be a chance to impersonate a werewolf in the werewolf experience, for example. There's going to be one piece that is based on Stanisław Lem's prose, kind of beautiful tale of robots, which is called Cosmogonic. Nice. But also speaking about things that are not necessarily outright comprehensible but beautiful. There is this piece called Red Tail. It's a Taiwanese VR, and it really resembles in the aesthetics early Tim Burton's films. It's about this otherworldly trip to the afterlife, which is just so beautifully made, and in 6 Degrees of Freedom. So yeah, please check out the VR section at Imagine as well.
There's lots to check out and probably much more. We'll include a link to the Imagine Film Festival in the show notes as well. Stan, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today for this.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
About our childhood scares.
Thank you very much for listening. You can find all show notes and films mentioned at celebratingcinema.com. Just click on this episode, Nightmares and Nostalgia Part 2. You'll also find all links to films mentioned that will be screening at Imagine Film Festival, which will be taking place from the 26th of October to the 5th of November, where you can watch it here at Lab 111. Don't forget also about our new partnership with Mubi. Feel free to check out their handpicked cinema, where you just have to go to mubi.com/lab111 to get your first 30 days for free. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast on whichever platform you're listening to and to leave us a review. It helps more people find us, and we'd really appreciate it. Again, feel free always to reach out to us at celebratingcinema@lab111.nl. Next episode, we'll be celebrating the infamous Jean-Luc Godard, which, of course, coincides with his recent passing. But it's a moment for celebration, and it'll be accompanied by another great program, Au revoir Godard, that we'll be running here at Lab 111. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time.